Welcome, Nolan, Bitcoiner. Another episode of Breakup. It's a show where we take a look at our psychological relationship with money, and really get to the root of perhaps what our problems are in America these days, in the world globally, in the economy. And we contrast that sort of psychology engine which perpetuates the economy based on the dollar. We contrast that with what is beginning to happen with a Bitcoin standard and the psychology that propels Bitcoiners like myself forward. So our whole argument is that, or my whole argument and purpose for the show is that it's not about trading a dollar for Bitcoins, and then you've got some Bitcoin, and then what happens, with your Bitcoin? Do you cash out? Like, whenever anyone asks you if you cash out, and as a Bitcoiner, you're looking at them like, what are you talking about, right? And they are like, well, what are you talking about, right? That whole like awkward dance. So this show is designed for you if you're the person who understands Bitcoin, and then asks a Bitcoiner, when are you going to sell out, or what other alts are you in, or all those other questions. And then you look at them confused when they say, well, I don't know what you're talking about selling. So it's to kind of get to that point, right? Like, why would a Bitcoiner be confused when you say, when are you selling, right? When are you cashing out, right? So that's the psychology piece. And that's what this show is about, really intended for those folks who get Bitcoin, but maybe don't get what the difference is in psychology that perpetuates the dollar forward and the psychology that perpetuates Bitcoin forward. And then we compare them and contrast them, and you'll sort of understand, I think, why, at least why I understand, we've got certain problems in our society today. It's really a follow the money situation, right? Follow the money. We're going to follow the money today. I like the title of this episode. I've been saying it for a while. So forget Jim Cramer. I'm calling this one, Wall Street's a porno, and they don't recognize when they're getting, pardon my language. So warning, if there's any children in the room, I'll say it again. Wall Street's a porno, or become a porno, de-risked, all that stuff. So Wall Street's a porno, and they don't recognize what it's like to get fucked for real anymore, because of this de-risking, because there's no risk anymore, right? Real risk. I'm not talking about risk management. I'm not talking about insurance. I'm not talking about all that stuff, right? I'm talking about a general level of risk, systemic risk that's inherent, and if you shield yourself from it, as the Keynesians have over the years, and you try to smooth over the economic cycles, it's possible to turn Wall Street into a porno. We're going to look at one industry in particular where this has happened, right? Where entropy has set in to systems that worked at the end of World War II and are now completely useless. And it's vaccines and the vaccine industry that we're going to look at to underline what's going on here. So a quick caveat, I don't care about your vaccine status. This is not about get a vaccine or don't get a vaccine. That's your decision, right? So I don't want to talk about that stuff. I'll let you know my personal status. I did get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, sort of pressured into it, I'd say. I was unable to assess my risks, right? No vaccine. I had COVID in January 2020. So if it was left up to me, I wouldn't have gotten the vaccine, frankly, right? I took it, not out of fear of COVID. I took it for the convenience of crossing borders. I travel an awful lot, and need to get back and forth. So, I was coerced into taking it. Now, the science behind vaccines, we're okay with. We're not here to talk about the science behind vaccines, really. We're here to talk about the process that goes into the vaccines and the vaccine industry itself. So if you can separate those two things, this is the right place for you. If you can't separate them, if you think I'm an anti-vaxxer or I'm pro-vaccine, or that, this is not really the show, right? Because we don't care about the vaccines in particular. We're talking about the vaccine industry. And in particular, we're talking about what Jim Cramer said yesterday, right? Jim Cramer, I guess he's like a guy, stonks, he's on TV. I used to go on all those TV shows. I stopped going on the TV shows because of people like Jim Cramer. I used to do a lot of Bitcoin on CNBC and CNN and all these places, right? And I had enough in the end, because it's like number go up, number go down, hack. 3 stories, right? They're not capable, not interested or incapable of speaking about a wide variety of aspects around Bitcoin. So, they always ask me to go on the shows, but I say no now. It's just not worth my time, and they're boring, and I don't care. So Uh, but this show is somewhat based on another mainstream media show. So the Tucker Carlson show. So let's start with the Jim Cramer one. So Jim Cramer does the stonks and buy things and don't buy it. It's hot. It's not. Da, 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 right? He's been doing that for years. Everyone kind of knows Jim Cramer's game. So he released or made a statement on his show yesterday that's sort of making the rounds with a lot of Bitcoiners today on Twitter. And I don't know if it's just outside of, I don't know if it really perpetuated outside of Bitcoin, but the Bitcoiners are talking about it today. So he said something, I'll paraphrase. If you want to go see the video, go ahead. The paraphrasement, and I don't think I'm being unfair, is the following. We need everyone to get the vaccine, right? In order to stop variants from rising and to put an end to COVID for good, right? So he predicts in the video that the end won't come to COVID because vaccines aren't mandatory and not everyone's getting them, which is allowing these variants to pop up. So his prediction is variants will continue forever unless everyone gets vaccinated. And he is willing to say that the military ought to go and enforce these vaccinations all around. 1 second. Pardon me, interrupted by family matters, which happens around here. So where was family issues? Pardon me, trying to get that stuff taken care of. I guess I'll just cut this video later and try and do an edit. So where was I now? So what Jim Cramer is unaware of, right? What Jim Cramer is unaware of is that, so he calls for the vaccine mandate, the military enforces it, that folks come around, I guess to your door and force you to get the vaccine, right? So the important prediction here from Jim Cramer's point of view, right? The important prediction from Jim Cramer's point of view is that the vaccines must be mandatory to stop variants, to stop COVID. Fair enough? I don't think I've exaggerated. I don't think I've put words in his mouth. I don't think I've been mind reading. I'm just trying to create the fairest version of what he said, right? The fairest version, the most accurate version, one that isn't easy to twist and make it sound like I'm creating a straw man or putting words in his mouth. So I think that's a fair assessment of what he said. Okay. Now, that would make sense, right? If this industry worked this way, the intention of the vaccine industry, right? So I put intent. And I believe this. I believe intentions are super important in this world, right? So I would imagine that a lot of people involved in the vaccine industry, their intentions are still in this world. And I think Jim Cramer believes this world, right? I think he thinks this is the way it works. And that's why he's saying, get the military involved, right? I think he believes that the vaccine industry looks like the intentions. Based on what he said, like I don't want to mind read, but based on what he said, military gets involved, we make sure everyone has it, it works, and then we don't have to get more variants, and we could end COVID, right? His prediction. If it worked that way, I'd say it's fine, right? Now, I don't know if anyone else has seen this video. It's a Tucker Carlson interview with Robert Kennedy Jr. Robert Kennedy Jr., of course, the son of Robert Kennedy, who was murdered by or assassinated by Sirhan when he was running for president after his brother, John F. Kennedy Jr., was assassinated in 1963. So Bobby Kennedy, they called him, Bobby Kennedy, assassinated. His son, I believe the eldest of 11 kids, about 70 something cousins and all that, one of these big families from the baby boom era. Bobby spent his life as a journalist, writer, I think lawyer, I'm not positive about that, but particularly on environmental stuff, as well as health related things, health industry, right? So much of his family was around to start the regulatory agencies that came about after World War II, right? So the design at the time was that in case a country like Russia deployed a bioweapon in America, that we had the industrial capacity to create a vaccine quickly to get us out of that trouble, right? So there was some military involvement in the outset, at the outset of the vaccine programs. The regulators that his family helped establish, so his uncle Teddy Kennedy, the CDC, all these things that we hear about every day, those are already part of the military because of this, right? That's why they have military ranks. That's why it's the Surgeon General, right? There is a military aspect to what the CDC does, right? They wear uniforms. So these health agencies are closely aligned with the military and have been for a long time, right? So closely aligned to the military. Like I said, the vaccine program was conceived in the National Defense Initiative as a national defense initiative, right? It was a big part of what happened. So these folks were set up for years, and it was already a military thing. So first of all, when Cramer says the military has to get involved, they already kind of are, right? They're not involved to the point of jabbing you by force at your door, but they're already involved, perhaps more than Jim Cramer knew. So that's the start of the blind spot. Maybe he wasn't aware of the history of the CDC and all of these agencies, but the history of them is certainly connected to the military and has been for a long time, right? The genesis of it was militaristic, right? The genesis of the vaccine program is militaristic. And there's an important distinction that happened because of that, right? And I'll fast forward to the height of the Cold War, in the 1980s. Maybe the height, I don't know. Is it the height? Well, anyway, it's a part where, we focus on a lot, and Reagan and this and that, right? And this is where the vaccine industry really begins to change, and you start to see the reality, right? So that's what I'm trying to contrast here. It's the intent of the vaccine industry compared to the reality of the vaccine industry. And this is what happened. It's an incredible thing, right? So the vaccines were coming out, right? Vaccines were being distributed. One in particular, I guess diphtheria. I don't even know what diphtheria is, so don't, I'm not a doctor, by the way. That's why this is not medical advice, right? I'm not trying to influence your vaccine decision one way or the other. I don't care. It's none of my business. I'm not a doctor, right? This is just about the vaccine industry and incentives, stuff that's related to the Bitcoin standard and the fiat standard and the dollar standard, right? The US dollar standard. That's all we're talking about, business models and incentives, right? So the intent contrasted with reality. What ends up happening is, because it is a military issue, right? Because the military has been involved in this from the start, and it was a national defense issue. The vaccine program was a national defense issue from the start. So there was a vaccine developed in the 80s. And what ends up happening is, let's go back to this model of how it's supposed to work, right? Pharma works with the regulators to come up with, safe vaccines. Insurance companies are there to help rate the effectiveness of the vaccine. It's part of the commercial process, right? So the intention is, there's a commercial component, there's a government component, There's a R&D component, and of course, people, right? So drug companies create the vaccine. Regulators, make sure it's safe. They use all the agencies that were created. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to protect you from any adverse events. Insurance helps them, right? That's another commercial force to counteract the pharma force, right? Those are supposed to balance each other, right? So look at the flow. Pharma creates, regulators contemplate, insurance is there again to figure out if that's safe, right? People take it, right? And then we follow it over time, and the insurance companies again look at the regulators and adjust, right, what's going on here and act as sort of a feedback loop, right? So if over time it's a little more dangerous than they thought, the insurance companies can figure that out as well, and the insurance companies can help tell pharma what to do better, right? So this is the way it's supposed to work, right? Now, what happens in the 80s is really important. What happens in the 80s is this little feedback loop changes, right? Changes in an important way. And this is a follow the money argument, right? I'm not trying to accuse anyone of corruption. This is just to follow the money. This is a broken incentives argument, right? This isn't a you're guilty as a person because you had this title and we're in the shop then and we're the head of the thing. Fauci, I don't care about Fauci, right? This is not about Fauci either, right? What happened was the insurance companies, when these vaccines were starting to come out in the 80s, said, and this one vaccine they created, right? It was determined that the adverse effects were much higher than they thought, right? It was much higher than they thought. And that vaccine wasn't going to work. The insurance companies themselves said, because the actuaries can start finding out like how much each individual dosage is going to cost, in terms of insure, they'll break it down to the unit. If it's one person in a million that's sick, well, then they'll just calculate the actuaries will cost the count of every dose for the million people, and whatever that one person cost, it's sort of like a function. Say if that one person required $1 million to fix whatever problem, the one in a million person required $1 million of medical bills to fix the problems caused by the vaccine in the first place, then it comes out to like $1 a dose to solve the problems, right? So it's really rough math, but you get my point, right? They mutualize the cost of adverse reactions across the entire population and understand the unit cost to deal with that, right? So what ends up happening is the insurance companies in the 80s say, forget about it, pharma. All these vaccines are too risky. We're not going to insure them, right? Or if we're going to insure them, they're going to be this much because we can't tell. We don't know what's going on here, and we can't really assess our risk, right? This is the porno piece. The insurance companies say, we can't say what the risk is right now, right? We can't express the risk. So what ends up happening is in 1986, both parties, Republican and Democrat, sign a bill around vaccines that say that it is unavoidably safe. That's in the preamble. Unavoidably unsafe. Pardon me. Unavoidably unsafe. Vaccines are unavoidably unsafe as a product, because what ends up happening here is they say we shouldn't have insurance companies should be excluded from the process, right? Insurance companies should be excluded because we're not liable. So the act pulled liability away from the pharma companies, right? It pulled away the liability. So the insurance companies were no longer needed. The insurance companies were honest. They said most of this stuff's going to end. The pharma company, it was Pfizer, said, well, if we can't do these, we're going to pull out all our vaccines and we're not going to produce any vaccines in America. So Reagan said, ooh, that's bad, right? We got a war. We need the military capacity to be able to scale vaccines quickly in the event of attack, right? So that persuaded Reagan. Reagan, I'm told from this interview with Bobby Kennedy, even said, well, why can't you make a safe vaccine? No. Right? But that's anecdote. Who knows about that? So Reagan signs it, right? Congress pushes it. We're done. Insurance companies, right? Intent. The insurance companies there as a counterbalance to pharma, as a commercial interest there to balance the profits of pharma, was removed. It was removed. What happens, right? This is what happens. Here's reality. Here's what we have now, right? But pharma, We've got the regulators, no insurance companies, but we got money, 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 money. What ended up happening was to get the regulators on side, the CDC and all these folks, and to make up for the role of no insurance companies, right? The regulators became basically vaccine incubators because they got a portion of the IP, right? So the IP ends up coming here, right? So let me put a note for that just because it's important, right? So the IP ends up coming partly to the regulators as well, right? So as I understand, Fauci has patent stake in the Moderna vaccine and several others, right? So what it looks like is the NIH, the CDC are kind of transformed into an incubator for pharma products. The vaccine, the companies get, the regulators get IP, right? They get royalties. Individual regulators get royalties, like they've created something. They get royalties from sales, right? Fauci gets royalties from the sales of vaccines, right? So what ends up happening is even people who work for the regulatory agencies, they only get promotions for pushing vaccine uptake. You understand? They don't get promoted for finding a bad vaccine or adverse effects with vaccines and stopping them. They don't do what the insurance companies were here and incentivized to do, motivated to do, right? To set a premium, to understand risk, to adjust the actuarial science to understand what the hell is going on, to provide this counterbalance. No, 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 no. What ends up happening is the regulators, right, get royalties. They're only rewarded for uptake of vaccines. There is no professional reward to be had. No promotions, nothing for finding a bad vaccine, right? And that's why vaccines have gone from 3 vaccines, right? There were 3 in the 60s when Bobby Kennedy was young, to now 16 different vaccines at 72 dosages, right? That's the standard fully vaxxed level for children today. And of course, nobody is studying. Nobody. There is no feedback loop here that studies what happens when you mix the vaccines. Do you think someone's actually looking into that stuff? Nobody's looking into it, right? Zero people are looking into that. So you've got all these folks who, for years have been operating in this way and have allowed the number of vaccines that we use to increase, right? So in the end, the vaccine program, even to align with the military in this way, and the way it worked with the insurance and the supplanting of, these commercial incentives and not the counterbalance of insurance and another commercial interest to the predominant commercial interests of pharma, created an unbelievable situation where vaccines aren't even considered medicine. Not considered medicine, right? Because if they were considered medicine, they would have to go through the medical scientific course to get approved, which means you need, double-blind, placebo-controlled tests over a 5-year period. None of that is done. It's not needed. It's not medicine. It's not medicine, right? So let's go back now and remember what Cramer's prediction was, right? Cramer's prediction was, this won't end, the variants won't end, and the vaccines won't end until we all get vaxxed, and the military must do it, right? What he doesn't understand is the risk is gone because the insurance companies are gone, right? Wall Street helped turn vaccines into the same porno that Wall Street is, de-risked with fiat money, right? So it's the same porno. There's no real risk for these guys, right? You don't get caught. You don't get in trouble for doing these things. So what ends up happening is the vaccines increase by this much, and Cramer's prediction that will stop seems a little foolish now. Why would it stop? Because everyone got vaccinated? Well, isn't the point of the vaccines to get more commercial uptake? What would stop anyone from finding another variant and really, deciding there's another product release, right? Another round. There's billions of dollars to be made for every other um, dosage that's being given out. Look at the amounts governments around the world are buying, billions of dollars worth of this vaccine constantly, right? Constantly buying this thing. So um, when you add it up, his prediction that it will stop is ridiculous. It's ridiculous, right? If the military comes in, the military is already in. It's already there, right? Why would they? What asking them to do one more thing to go put it in you at your door and make it mandatory seems like if it worked this way, maybe, right? But it doesn't work that way. It works this way. It's just more money. It wouldn't stop, right? That's where Cramer gets it wrong. His prediction is wrong, and I believe his intent is right. Remember, his intent is fine, I believe. I can't mind read him. But the reality is what he's asking for is insane. It won't end there, right? Now you take a look at Bobby Kennedy Jr., who also made a prediction. Bobby Kennedy also predicted. And predictions are important because they test your worldview at the time you made them, right? So if your prediction is right, in my mind, the factors that went into your decision to predict that future were accurate or more accurate than someone else's, right? So Bobby Kennedy in March 2020 predicted multiple vaccines would be ready really quick. Who else predicted that? How many people laughed at Trump when Trump said, "Oh, we'll have the vaccine in 6 months"? They laughed at him, right? It was ridicule. What an idiot! He's so dumb. What a moron! Look at him, his dumb university, and now he's a vaccine guy, right? Well, Bobby Kennedy, I don't know, he's not Trump. Bobby Kennedy Jr. says in March 2020, I predict multiple vaccines from many companies, multiple doses, and he predicts multiple variants to come after. Who's right? Right? Is it Jim Cramer who says let the military do it and then it will go away, but he doesn't understand the military is already doing it, right? Or is it Bobby Kennedy Jr. who says the military is the reason why this thing's screwed up? They help take away the insurance feedback loop. They help turn it into a situation where all you need to do is follow the money. Like, this isn't that complicated, right? I've simplified it, but it's even more simple than this, I think, right? Follow the money, right? There might be some criminals here. It's not necessarily even criminal, right? It's just to follow the money. Jim Cramer probably doesn't know that Wall Street is a porno. He doesn't know, right? No one told him. He still thinks that the U.S. dollar is a really good numeraire for Wall Street. Well, when you take away the U.S. dollar's function as a steady numeraire, the whole thing's garbage. The whole thing becomes a porno, especially with especially with uh, fiat money being printed, right? So you take away the feedback loop here, you rejig the incentives around the vaccine industry, right? Just like some of the incentives on Wall Street were rejigged. What ends up happening is the whole thing is a porno. Risk is removed, right? Well, Bitcoin, for the case of Wall Street, is going to teach them what it's like to get fucked for real, right? Because we didn't remove the risk, right? And these insurance companies, so Bitcoiners learned in FIRE what it's like to hold an asset that is really a psychological commodity, right? Bitcoin is a pure psychological commodity. And the psychology of that commodity was tempered by constant attacks, destruction, but psychologically, most Bitcoiners said, this is going to persevere. I'm going to persevere, right? I'm going to fix the money and create incentive systems that make things like the vaccine industry work much better. So the point will be to remove this financial and militaristic influence that grew out of institutions that won the Second World War, and replace those institutions with new incentives that should bring us to where the industry works properly and we haven't created a big mess. That's everything for today, everyone. Pardon the little interruption earlier. I'll try to edit that out. Thanks, guys.